It's my great pleasure to introduce my next box seat hero guest, Justin King.
Thank you, Roger.
Ex-CEO of Sainsbury.
I am that man, yes.
Ex-director of food of Marks and Spencer.
Yeah.
And multiple board member.
Yeah, that's my life now. Yeah.
Justin, welcome to our little Muse house.
Thank you. Very nice it is too. Very nice.
Well, it doesn't look so nice now, does it? Because we've moved all the furniture out the way. So me and you have known each other now for what? More than 10 years, nearly 20 years?
Yeah, I suppose so.
So it was, you were...
I was going to say since we were young, but that's not true,
no,
really.
It isn't. We're a bit older. So look, as part of this series, it's basically the heroes of consumer brands that I've met on my journey. And obviously you've made the list.
Thank you.
Okay. So why don't you just start off by just telling us about your early life? Let's start off with, where you were born, just inspire the entrepreneurs out there or retailers out there to say, look, I can do it if you can do it. So tell us about your early life all the way up to university. I know you got an MBA, so... But let's.
No, I haven't actually. No,
haven't you? I thought
I got a business degree, but not
from
an
Bath.
MBA. From Bath.
Oh, there you go. I did my research.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Well, early days, I was born in the East End of London. I like to say I was born on the set of Call the Midwife in a bedsit just off the Mile End Road. So
I never knew you were from the East End of London.
Yeah, so I'm a Cockney by birth, but my dad, he was cleaning cars when I was born, and then he was a paint salesman, moved us to the Midlands. So I was brought up in Birmingham.
What in what part of Birmingham?
South Birmingham, the bit that became quite posh.
Solihull.
Well, Solihull if you're properly, but yeah, Solihull.
Yeah.
And I went to Tudor Grange School in Solihull, which is a really great comp. Yeah. Passed the 11 plus. Yeah. Went to it as a grammar school, but it was converted to a comp in my second year.
That was same as me in my first year. So you must be. Are you a year younger than me?
Am I? I mean, I look a lot younger than that, but is it only a year?
I'm 59.
I'm 64. So actually...
Oh, you sort of changed over then.
Well, different parts of the country changed at different times. Yeah.
So you went to the
I'm actually now really chuffed that I'm 5 years older than you.
I wouldn't expect anything more really because, in terms of career, you're definitely more than 5 years ahead of me. So you went to the local comp?
Yeah, and was the kid that hated school. I suppose I was a reasonably bright kid, but I found it super boring. But love sport.
What sports?
A lot of kids. Well, all sports, but football, I guess, was my passion. My boyhood hero was Bobby Charlton.
What was your position?
Centre back.
It's a bit boring, isn't it?
Yeah, I know.
So did you have no talent?
Scythe people. Well, no, although I like to think I had a lot of talent, but my talent finished with a very badly broken leg when I was 16.
Seriously? Wow.
Playing out of position in centre forward, chased a back pass, toe poked it under the goalie, and the next thing I'd virtually severed the bottom of my right leg.
Oh, wow.
So I spent a couple of years, 5 operations on crutches. But serendipity, it meant I was never going to fulfill any sporting ambitions, still walk with a bit of a limp. And it meant I studied for my A-levels, which I wouldn't have done probably, and got half-decent grades, which has got me into Bath University.
What A-levels?
I did maths, physics and geology.
I did maths, chemistry and biology.
Well, I was going to do geophysics at university, but then I realised that that was a lot like hard work. So the true story I used to tell it the graduates at Sainsbury's and other places was I went on a day trip. My college, I went to sixth form college. I left school at 16 and did A-levels at sixth form college. And so they sent us off to universities. One of the ones that we went on a bus trip to was Bath. And I fell in love with the town of Bath, who wouldn't?
Nice university.
And decided I wanted to go there, but geophysics looked like a lot like hard work. I still had aspirations to get back into playing football. They had a very good football team at the time.
After the broken leg?
Yeah.
After 5 operations?
Yeah, of course.
Were you that good?
I was a half-decent footballer. But...
If you don't mind me saying, you're not sort of the most vertically sort of challenged guy, are you? You're not that tall.
I was very, very quick.
Well, how do you do with the Duncan Fergusons of this world?
Well,
big
run faster than them, isn't it? Right, run faster than them. Pace is everything, right? I'm taller than Wayne Rooney, right? And he scored a lot of goals. Many of them with his head. No, so I fell in love with Bath. I sat in those days. There was a book about the size of that thing on your desk. And I vowed I was going to study the subject with the fewest number of lectures. And it was sociology. And with apologies to those out there that studied sociology, I couldn't bring myself to do that. So I did business. It was 13 and a half hours of lectures a week.
13 and a half hours is quite a lot.
Well, yeah, but it meant a lot of time for other things.
Right,
so.
Obviously.
But it was a sandwich course, and I also was very ready for the world of work. I'd been working to have my first job as a paper boy when I was 12. In fact, when I left Sainsbury's, the Birmingham Evening Mail, the headline was "Former Male Paperboy Retires." And the paperboy bit was true, although I wasn't retiring. So I wanted to go into the world of work. I flirted with accountancy. But because the course was a sandwich course, it meant that I could work as well as study. And I was sponsored in the end through university by Lucas Electrical, and thought my destiny was the motor industry.
Used to work with British Leyland, didn't they?
Well, they were
all the parts.
Along with Bosch, Lucas Electrical and Bosch were the two biggest auto component suppliers in the world in the 1970s.
Does it still exist?
Probably in part.
Yeah.
Do you know, one of the things I did on one of my placements was I rode from Great King Street in Birmingham, which is now a housing development, which is the Lucas factory, back to my house about 11 miles away, just outside Solihull. Their first
long ride then.
Electric bike.
11 miles?
Yeah,
electric bike?
Electric bike, but that was whatever that would be. I don't know, 1979, 1980. Yeah. So they were ahead of their time, but unfortunately didn't convert their innovation into money.
So that was your first job in terms of management. So what was that, a graduate program or something?
Well, no, that was undergraduate. So they sponsored me through university.
Yeah.
And so I had a guaranteed job.
Or did you have to work every summer and stuff like that?
No, 2 6-month placements. Bath did a thin sandwich. So a year on, 6 months off, year on, 6 months off, which was great. One, because you actually got some money in your pocket. So you were a student
rich
with
student.
A bit of cash. You had a car when I was a student.
Car
and
I bet you were popular.
Yeah, well, most of the people on my course, because it was because of the thin sandwich, people went out and earned money. But so I had a guaranteed job. You know, when I hear people talk about how tough it is for young people today to find a job, you know, I went to a very good course with a bunch of really great people, and over half of them didn't get a job within their first year of graduation in 1983. You know, but we were right at the height of the collapse of our traditional industries in the early Thatcher years, and so I had a guaranteed job. So.
And you were paid to go to study.
And I was paid to study, yeah. So it was great all round. But I applied to 4 companies, one of whom was Mars. And it was
after university?
Yeah, so that was my first after university job.
And you didn't have an obligation to go and do a year or?
I did. And I phoned them up. Can't remember his Christian name. O'Shaughnessy, the HR guy was called. And I said, I'm going to take another job with Mars, and offered to pay all the money back. And they very decently said, no, that's the game. We take that gamble, which was great of them. Yeah.
Wow, that was cutthroat of you.
It was.
Early on, you were like, thank you for giving me all this money to study. I'm buggering off.
Well, it was great cash as well. I mean, I think my starting salary at Lucas would have been about $3,500 a year. And I remember the precise figure. How sad am I? My starting salary at Mars was £8,012 a year.
Oh, so no wonder you went for it.
So it wasn't that hard a decision, if I'm being honest.
Do you know, I recently calculated how much money I was getting to study, and it would be equivalent in modern day money to a salary of £40,000 a year, about £35,000 a year.
Being able to go to university and not leave with a huge debt is a huge difference to the current generation.
Huge.
Although so many few of us went, I think my cohort was probably 75,000, and the university cohort's now more like 300,000. So university's changed for lots of reasons out of all recognition.
Yeah, and the ridiculous thing about it is, as you rightly say, when we went, it really mattered a lot. I mean, I was the first person ever in my family to go to university, or certainly one of the first. Yeah, well, likewise. So it was rare. It was less than 5%, I think. A lot less. And
I don't think I would have gone had it not been, because I did want to work, and because I did work and the sandwich courses, it meant I paid for myself through university along with the grant. Yeah. I was the eldest of 4 boys. I had 3 younger brothers, very close in age. I was 6 when my youngest brother was born. So one of the things you talked about in terms of forming experiences, for me, I've my earliest memories are all one of my parents saying, "You're in charge." And all my negotiating skills were learned negotiating with three younger brothers whose default setting was to do the opposite of whatever their big brother
Of course.
said. But my parents tried to be as even-handed as they could. We didn't in the early years have a lot of money. But, my father went on to some success.
What did your father used to do, or your mum
He was a
used to do?
salesman and eventually became sales director of a small petrochemicals company in the motor
wow.
industry. And very nice, successful business, retired in his late 50s with a full final salary pension. There's something of the past as well.
Very nice.
And then worked for my brother in my brother's building firm for about 30 years. And my father's still with us. He's 89.
Wow,
Still,
so you've got good genes.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope it hasn't skipped a generation. His father died. My grandparents, my paternal grandfather was a postman for 50 years.
Yeah.
And he died within a year of retiring.
Right.
And then my maternal grandfather was a baker, and he was still baking well into his late 80s.
So basically, you're never retiring.
Well, I've never quite got my head around what retiring looks like. I don't do any of the things that other people do in their retirement. So I like to think I can find a balance between work and play.
So, I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? Because, we've both been, I guess, in a similar situation that we made a bit of a money in terms of our early career, and we don't really need to work now. So what really motivates you to work? What is it that makes you get up every day?
Well, there's something in that question that sort of implies money was ever a motivation. I don't think,
It was for me.
Was it? It wasn't, Ace. It wasn't. I've met people who are driven by that. And I do think our upbringing, if you I was telling somebody this the other day and they were quite shocked when you look at it through the modern lens. I had free school meals when I was a kid.
Free milk?
But free milk before Mrs. Thatcher did for that. But I think all
that
kids,
was bad, by the way.
all kids had that.
Yeah.
But I had free school meals. But when I had free school meals, you stood in the queue. The kids that were paying for them got first choice. And then you had what was left. Basically,
no way.
Yeah, that's how it was.
No, it didn't work like that in my school.
Well, it did in mine.
No,
so I'm still today.
They would have never had that.
As you can say, I eat everything on the plate, right? Because that's how I was brought up, and I pay the price for that now. Yeah. I wish I could leave food on the plate, but yeah. So for me, success in and of itself was what drove me, and competition in particular. I'm a very competitive person.
Yeah.
As I said, my boyhood hero was Bobby Charlton. I suppose my other boyhood hero would have been Ian Botham. They say don't meet your heroes. I've met and got to know both.
I met Botham.
Well, Bobby Charlton was everything you would have hoped he would be. He's just a thoroughly excellent human being.
I think Botham is everything you think he is.
Yeah, he's everything you think he is. But but the thing that disappointed me about Ian is he has no interest in the sport per se. So he's actually put nothing back into the sport, really.
Yeah.
And I think that's something you should do.
He had a bit of a falling out, though, didn't he?
Well, he did. But, those are the people that were in charge. Just because you've fallen out with the people in charge. Business is what's given me everything in my life. And therefore, I've tried in the latter stages of my career to put something back to wider society. I do things in charity, but also through mentoring young business people and getting involved in startup businesses. Because I think, there is a bit
Am I including the young business people?
Well, I don't think I'm mentoring you by any stretch of the imagination. But you are younger, as we have established. But so I think you should get something back. So that side of Ian always disappointed me. But I remember saying to Ian once over a beer, when I was a kid, I wanted to be you. And he said, well, when I was a kid, I wanted to be you, because actually he was very jealous of people that had been successful in business. And of course, that's what he's tried to do with his wine business, amongst others, in latter life. So I think...
Has he got a wine business?
Yeah, quite a big one.
Is it called Botham Wine?
I don't know what it's called, actually.
I'd expect him to have a sausage business, not a beer business, not a wine business.
No, I've got a wine business.
Wow.
Out of Australia, I think. Yeah, you should look it up.
Really?
I think so, yeah.
That's bizarre.
Probably don't quote me on that, but I have now said it on the podcast.
Do you want my Botham story?
Go on. I'm not going to tell you my Botham story, but you can tell me yours.
My one's a bit risque, actually. I was really mad into cricket. I played a lot of cricket when I was young, and I was okay. It was pretty decent until I met a proper player, okay? And as one of the things of being a good young cricketer, they used to get you to go to Oval and Lords and help out, okay? And one day, I remember, I think we were playing New Zealand, and I think Alan Lamb was making his debut. For those of you who don't know, good cricketer, was South African, but we sort of recruited him. And he scored a century. I think he scored 150 or something like that. And afterwards, I had to carry Ian Botham's bags back to his car. And his car was a Saab. Back in the day, Saabs were popular.
Saab 900.
900, he had one of them. And you didn't make any money in cricket in those days. And I remember he didn't really say anything to me. I'm just following behind him, carrying his bag. And he opened up the back of his boot for me to put the bag in, his cricket bag. And obviously I was an impressionable, like 16-year-old. And it was full of porn magazines. And I sort of looked at them and then looked at him, and he sort of gave me a smile and a nod, and I put it away. Well, that was Ian Botham.
Well, I got to know Alan Lamb quite well, actually.
Did you? Good cricketer.
Very good. And he, the Botham stories I can't tell you, but largely come from Alan because he was Ian's roommate for many years.
He was a boy.
He was the only person that could keep pace with Ian, I think, was pretty much the size of it. But the point of the story is I think there's a lot of things that drive sports people and business people in common. And for me, the driving force was not, as we touched on earlier, making money. That's a consequence of success in business. It was the competitive thing itself. It was beating the other guy. That's always been what's driven me.
But Justin, don't you think the competitive side, because we come from similar sides of the track. So, I was basically born and raised in a council estate in South London, initially to just a single mum, went lucky enough to go to a local grammar school because only the thick ones went to the private schools because grammar was really good. But what you really wanted was you wanted what everyone else had. So yes, the competitive side of it was I want to be successful, but the actual mark of success was making money. But then when you finally achieve that goal, and that's why so many entrepreneurs come from quite humble beginnings, you then suddenly realize, actually, there's nothing, I had everything I wanted.
There's something very challenging, I think, in those of us that come from those humble backgrounds and have success, which is undoubtedly some of what drove us. For me, like I said earlier, standing in the queue for school meals, not having, I never had a new bike in my life until my late 20s.
Yeah.
I got hand-me-downs from uncles. And the idea that you would go into a shop and buy a new bike was alien in extreme, And I remember the first time I bought one. Did your mum used to repair
your trousers?
Yeah, and Dana socks and all that kind of thing. And
hand-me-down blazer jackets.
And that didn't fit.
Yeah.
Everything was bought 3 sizes too big when it was bought. So
the shoes that didn't
grow
fit.
into it. But all of that, so those things undoubtedly drive you. But then the first thing you do with a bit of success is withdraw all of those inputs to your kids. So what is it going to drive your kids and your grandkids if they have all of the trappings of privilege that, of course, you give them, because otherwise what's the point in having earned the money in the first place? But actually what you're doing is you're removing the stimuli. It's
you make it too easy.
Contradictory. Yeah.
You make it too easy. Like with my son, because I used to like to play sports, so I automatically assume, I can say this because he's gone out now, I automatically assume, he's going to love his sports. So every time he took up a sport, whether it's cricket or rugby, I'd get him all the gear and then he'd pack it up, And I'm like, oh, geez.
And then he told you, Dad, I want to play a guitar.
Well, in the end, he went, I want to be an artist, Dad.
Well, there you go.
I was like, I wasn't really that good at
unfortunately,
art.
my son became my outlet for my sporting ambitions. So I've enjoyed sport vicariously through him. He's a very good
because he's a talented motor racing driver.
Yeah, he is. But he was.
Where's he at now?
Well, he's largely backroom, so he does the simulator at Alpine Formula One and Mahindra Formula E, and manages some young drivers and doing all that side of things now.
He was at Formula 2. Did he make it to Formula 1?
He's done a few Fridays in Formula 1, and did Indianapolis.
What's a Friday?
Well, driving the Formula 1 car on the Friday morning before the race weekend starts.
Yeah.
So reserve driver, basically, is where he made it to. But a lot of things have to fall into place to be a Formula 1 driver. And
i.e. money.
Yeah, money's a big part of it. Big sums of money, a big part of it. But, he's made a fantastic career. I'm very proud of what he's done, given, the knockbacks that he's had along the way. One of the reasons why I ended up in FMCG and then retail is they're very, very measurable environments. There's no doubt who's winning and who's losing.
Yeah.
And I've always thrived off the weekly sales data. Are you beating the other guy? my 10 years at Sainsbury's overlapped with Terry Leahy, one of the greatest retailers of our generation. And
started off as a shelf packer, didn't he?
I'm not sure. I think he may well have done a shift or two.
Yeah.
But, I think he started.
Well, John Gildersleeve did, didn't he? Who was chairman?
Yeah, I think Terry started as a junior in the marketing department, perhaps.
Okay, all right.
But again, retail has lots of lifelong stories. People. Sainsbury's, one of the very few jobs that I've ever applied for and not got was shelf stacking at Sainsbury's when I was 16 years old.
Why, you couldn't reach the top shelf?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out how
has
you
anyone
don't
out
get
there
that
seen
job.
Roger standing up? It's interesting that he makes
I've
comments
got wedges
about,
on today.
He has. But no, I think it is an industry that has those journeys of people working all the way from the bottom up, and it's brilliant for that. And it's blind to people's background and open only to what you can deliver and achieve. So I've ended up working in industries that are very measurable because for me, being able to measure success by reference to the other guy, our like-for-like sales in Sainsbury's for the 10 years I was CEO beat Terry Leahy's performance by 1.7%.
I noticed. I read that earlier. I think it's on your Wikipedia or something.
I've certainly put it out there.
Yeah, because you were there 10 years as CEO.
Years. Yeah.
But before we get on to Sainsbury, let's rewind to Mars. Yeah. You arrive at Mars. Are you on the graduate program then?
Graduate program at Mars.
Okay, so talk to us about the time you were at Mars.
Well, Mars at the time had what became reputation of the graduate program at the time was fabulous. Over a 3 or 4 year period, probably 10 people that went on to be chief executives of big businesses went through the graduate scheme. My own year, there were 5 of us in the intake. A couple were
just
chief
5.
Execs. It was a very small, very high
5 on a graduate
scheme.
program of Mars.
Yeah,
but they went to every milk round at every university. I remember the Mars stand at our university.
Well, I think we started as 6 and one didn't last the first week. I think it was a bit like that. But as I remember, it was 4,000 people applied and 6 places.
Wow.
So just getting through the door was an achievement. And their view was we've recruited people who we believe can be chief execs. Philosophically, they weren't recruiting
like marketing managers and stuff like that.
They were recruiting people who they thought had the talent to go all the way, and they invested in you with that in mind. So you did the first week was like a lot of graduate schemes, I'm sure. It was sort of paying rations and where the coffee machine is and all of that kind of thing, and some training about the culture of the organisation and the history. And you literally got an envelope at the end of the first week with your first job in it, a bit like the kind of apprentice type
really
thing. And
you didn't get assigned like 3 months here, 3 months there.
Well, that's how it worked out. But you were sponsored by a division. In my case, it was supplies. I had this vague idea I was going to buy cocoa or do something like that. Someone had seen that I'd worked for an engineering company, so I was actually allocated to the engineering part of buying, factory side. Yeah. And my first job was production shift manager, D shift, Galaxy. Turn up at 6 a.m. on Monday morning. So,
making Galaxy bars.
Making Galaxy. So my first 6 months was production shift manager, 22. I mean, it's nuts, really.
Good chocolate, by the way.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Best.
Really?
Why have cotton when you can have silk? Still remember the advertising.
Was that the advert?
That was the advertising, which was a knock of...
Why have cotton?
When you can have silk.
Okay, all right.
If you'd like me to really bore why that is, it's to do with the mill size of the crumb when you make the chocolate.
Okay.
So Cadbury's Dairy Milk is milled to about 25 microns. Most of us can just about taste 25 microns on our tongue. 18 to 20 microns, which is Galaxy, you can't taste on your tongue, which is why it has a much smoother eat.
Wow.
Whereas Yorkie is more like 30 microns, which is why Yorkie tastes quite gritty. And then
hence the truck driver.
Chunky chocolate, you see.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I ran the production line, but it's just bizarre. That
for how long?
6 months, because that, to your point, it was 6 months. And then I came out and I did 6 months in sales as a territory salesman in East 17.
Selling what?
Everything. You're going into stores and...
Out the back of a car?
Well, not quite, but you were scratching a pad, a 5-part transfer pad where one went to the cash and carry or the wholesaler and one went to the retailer and one back up to sales because you got your sales performance measured every week. So old-fashioned field territory rep selling.
I bet you love that.
Yeah,
everything
I did,
is selling.
I love that. I love that. I used to go and bake with my granddad, and he always used to say, "You have to sell yourself rich. Sell more.
It's all about selling.
Money. And so that was the grounding that Mars gave you. And then you got your kind of first proper job, which for me was in engineering buying. So I was buying wrapping machinery and equipment for the factory.
So it is what you thought they put you into in the end.
And as part of that, I met Neil England, who was the sales director at the time, went on to run a number of businesses. And I was in the back of his car one day. I remember it was an Audi 2+2. And there was him, and I can't remember who else was in the front, but I'm sat in the back like this because I was the junior buyer, and we were going to see a supplier about buying. Do you remember those brown display racks that you used to see in corner shops that had all the confectionery?
Yes, yeah.
Well, they were injection molded, and I was buying the tooling for the injection molds.
Okay.
And so Neil was in charge of the rollout of these to all the corner shops. And we sat in the back of the car, and he said, "You're wasted as a buyer. You should be a salesman. Why don't you come and work for me?" So I flipped into sales, and I spent the rest of my career at Mars on the sales side of things.
Any particular brands?
No, that's not how it was organised. So it was organised by channel. Yeah. So I spent a bunch of time in the new channels team working for a guy called Paul Monk, who's still a great friend. In fact, he's coming to my wedding, my second marriage, in 3 months' time. And Paul was in charge of outward growth. So we were opening up, sounds crazy when I say that, non-traditional channels of distribution. So things like chemists, video hire shops.
Wow.
Which didn't traditionally stock stock confectionery. And then I moved into grocery sales, and I had what was known as the department and variety sector. So I was responsible for Woolworths, Boots, and Littlewood. So
right.
2 out of 3, of course, no longer with us. But it was 40 years ago, right? Yeah. So the world was a different place.
So you're at Mars for how long?
7-ish years, something like that.
Okay. Next job was PepsiCo?
Pepsi, yeah, international. So I joined, quite a few Mars people did, and Pepsi were populating their Middle East team with sort of high quality sales team because after the 6-Day War, that feels very current, Coke were part of the Arab boycott because they bottled in Israel. So Pepsi had the marketplace to themselves for about 15 years. And Coke was starting to get back into the Gulf Peninsula, the GCC. And so Pepsi were recruiting a professional sales team, really, to secure the sales.
And was this in the 80s, 90s?
89, 90.
So it was sort of a heyday, wasn't it? Michael Jackson sort of time.
Yeah, I mean, I had a fantastic time. I think sat next to Saddam Hussein in a football stadium.
Wow.
I say think because he had at least half a dozen body doubles, so it might have been one of them, because we sponsored the Arab Football Federation Cup, amongst other things. And Pepsi, I was only there for a year or so, and they went through one of their regular reorganizations. I ended up marketing director of Pepsi Egypt, of all places, lived in Cairo. And then a guy called Ove Sorensen phoned me, and Ove was worldwide marketing director of Pepsi. I'd come across him because I'd written the sales plan for the Middle East. It won some
for
kind
Egypt.
Right, this was the Middle East, securing it. And it won some kind of internal Pepsi prize.
Okay.
So he phoned me up and said, I've just been poached by Grand Met, who just bought Pillsbury, and they discovered Häagen-Dazs as this fabulous brand inside Pillsbury. And he said, will you come?
Pillsbury dough man.
That's right. And
taking on Ben and Jerry.
Yeah.
You were the big bad wolf.
Well, that's right. So he phoned me and he said, will you come and write that plan you wrote? Will you come and write for our market entry in Europe?
Wow.
And if you do a good job, I'll give you a good job at the end of it. So I wrote the market entry plan, and the good job that I got at the end of it, age 29, was managing director of the UK business.
At 29?
At 29.
So you were a proper high flyer.
It sounds like a lot, but it was stocked in Harrods and had one PA in Brighton, because Pillsbury were based in Brighton in those days. So it wasn't much. It was basically, create the business from scratch. Yeah, well, we built the business. I mean, obviously, Grand Met had reasonably deep pockets, so we had the ability to build very quickly, which most entrepreneurs just don't have that kind of financial freedom. But we took the business remember, this is 35 years ago now.
Yeah.
So from a standing start, say, being sold in Harrods, to about 30 million a year in 3 years.
Wow.
In
3 years?
3 years, yeah. So the market entry strategy, which has been much used by others actually since, was that we opened ice cream parlours in iconic locations because we were about establishing the brand and its
get
credentials.
it
tasted and price acceptance because where we were going to be.
A bit more premium.
Food service, again, get it in the right environment, get people to taste it when they're paying £2, £3 a scoop, because you're going to charge them £3 for a pot, a half litre pot. And the next most expensive product was at half that price. And it was, when we launched it at £3 a pot back then, that was 10 times the average price of ice cream at that time.
Wow.
So strongly resisted, ironically, given where I went, multiple retail, because I was determined to stay out of multiple retail till we'd established the brand and its price premium.
Made it premium.
And eventually had my arm twisted by Sainsbury's, because Lord John Sainsbury, who I came to know, obviously, had seen it in his local deli. He lived in just off Sloane Square, and he'd seen it in Partridge's, which is still there.
Yeah.
And he had told his team, go and find this product. I wished it to be stock in Sainsbury's. And I was called in to see the frozen food bar. It was a guy called Mike Morgan. And he did the full thing, sat me in reception, didn't make the appointment, turned up an hour late, called me in, made me stand before he gave me permission to sit in his office.
No.
The whole thing.
Wow.
And then he looked up.
And you were the sales director at the time.
Well, I was the managing director at the time. We were 3 men and a dog, right? And so he looked up and he said, yes. And I said, yes, what? And he said, well, come on then. And I said, well, you asked me to be here. I said, I assumed you had something to say. And he looked it up and he said, you really don't understand how this sales process works, do you? And I said, no, I do. I said, the thing is, I don't want to sell, but you want to buy.
See, you did understand. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he said, that's going to cost you. He said, that's going to cost you. But I knew that John Sainsbury was twisting his arms. So, and the bit we wanted to hold on to was our own distribution. The Sainsbury's supply chain at the time wasn't cold enough for Häagen-Dazs ice cream and would have destroyed it.
Really?
Yeah, we needed to keep it below minus 18, ideally.
Well, how did the other ice cream brands deal?
Well, because that's why Häagen-Dazs was so unique. No emulsifiers, no stabilizers, just the 4 ingredients you need to make great ice cream. Most ice cream didn't even see dairy, right, in the UK at the time. And it's full of guar gum and all sorts of other things and pumped full of air to hold it together. Even today, right, if you take soft scoop ice cream and leave it on a plate, an hour later, although it's melted, it will still have shape.
Yeah.
If you put Häagen-Dazs on a plate and leave it for an hour, it will melt to liquid. There's nothing
it's
to
not
hold
full
it
of
together.
air.
It's not full of air.
I never knew that.
And which is part of why the price premium, you see, because ice cream, unusually for a foodstuff, is sold by volume. And so, of course, the cheapest ingredient is air. So Häagen-Dazs has the minimum amount of air in. So take a half litre pot of Häagen-Dazs, weighs about 400 grams. So it's 20% air.
But
half litre pot of soft scoop will weigh about 200 grams. If that, it'll be 60% air.
Wow. But it's weird, isn't it? Because there you are, Häagen-Dazs, sort of the entry. And then, because I sort of follow the story of Ben and Jerry, because I'm a bit of a fan of Ben Cohen, particularly. And they were then the new entry to the market, competing against the big guys. I mean, this was definitely in the States, where Häagen-Dazs had massive domination.
Yeah,
But
Pillsbury, interesting, in the States, didn't own that bit of the business, right? The ice cream parlor business had been retained by the Mathis family when they sold out the brand to Pillsbury. So they'd retained that as a kind of private family business. In the end, they did have to acquire it, I believe. But they bought the brand to market it worldwide, effectively, in pots. So we always thought it's quite funny that the Ben & Jerry's sort of presented this fighter brand story, but actually we were the fighter brand.
I never knew that.
They were much more mainstream in America than Häagen-Dazs in pots ever was. And of course in Europe, at the time you had Loesley ice cream here in the UK. And then Ben & Jerry's came relatively late in the day after the market had been pioneered by Häagen-Dazs. I would argue that Ben & Jerry's European market entry was almost entirely piggyback on the back of Häagen-Dazs opening up the market for what was called super premium ice cream.
For premium ice cream.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was very cool 3 years. We had a lot of fun. We did some fun things, did some very famous advertising, which caused a big stir.
What was it?
Well, it was kind of food meets sex.
Oh, yes, I remember. Yeah. Who was the photographer?
Jean-Luc Sif. So a very famous fashion.
That's very well pronounced, by the way. Yeah.
Oh, well,
yeah, very, very well pronounced.
I've just been sorting out because I've moved house and I've got 4
the original prints.
Of the original prints signed by him. Yeah.
They'd be worth something.
Well, probably aren't. They're also the ones we couldn't use in the advertising because the original shoot, they were real couple. So
did you go to the shoot?
No, weren't allowed. He wouldn't let us because the insight was
a creative.
Well, we were working with BBH, John Hegarty and the team.
I used to work there for 3 months before I got sacked.
That's quite a long queue. And we got the usual agency pitch. They pitched 3 things. There was the kind of the ingredient story, which was very rational, and actually I really liked the ads. And then there was the kind of quality story, which was all sort of Gaudi imagery and swirling staircases and all that kind of thing. And then there was the food meets sex thing, which is
totally the way to go.
And so, of course, we all went, we like that idea, right? But
you all went immediately.
Well, the reason was we'd done a bunch of research, right? And we hadn't really launched the product, and we were getting, our target group was 20 to 30 singles through the parlour environment and so on.
Yeah.
And we did the usual, dozen people in a room behind a mirror, pots of ice cream, free-flowing wine. And what was really fascinating in these research groups was that people...
Male and female mixed.
Yeah. And people couldn't find the language to describe the eating experience that didn't have sexual metaphor. So they were saying things like, it's orgasmic and things like that in the research. Straight up in the research, right? Yeah. And people were literally pairing, and they were like, let's go for a drink after. So we sat there in the research and said, well, that's the answer, right? Yeah. And then they came up, obviously, with the creative idea of juxtaposing it with a little bit of innuendo, a photo, and then product stories. So if you remember, there were 2-page spreads with a very eye-catching photo.
Yes.
And then the story on the right-hand side had a very soft sort of double entendre to the idea of what was taking place.
It was like Robert,
left.
Is it Mapplethorpe? It was very sexualized.
Black and white, very powerful.
Yeah.
And so they were real couples. So the people that actually they were recruited
like the
by
Levi
the agency
adverts
as real couples. Yeah, well, of course, Levi was BBH,
with BBH as well. Yeah.
So the real couples, and they were basically taken to the studio with Jean-Loup, and he said, eat the ice cream, take some clothes off, and we'll see how it goes.
Wow. Hence why you weren't invited to the shoot.
That's why we weren't shot, because they were real. So they were very powerful. We'd actually, although I said earlier we had the resource of Grand Met, our advertising budget was tiny. In the first year, it was 300,000.
Yeah.
And so we were, trying to make a little money.
You needed shock and awe.
Yeah. Although we didn't. It was. I got a phone call. Alan Shepherd, later Lord Shepherd, who ran Grand Met. I was summoned to see him.
Yeah.
And again, he did the kind of meet in the office, sit outside, walk in. He actually did
big boardroom.
A big office, bigger than your house, and.
This is my London house,
This is your London house. Sorry, not bigger than your real house. And he did the full, don't sit down because this won't take long. Yeah. And gave me a dressing down for how I had brought his wonderful company into disrepute by doing his...
Well, he didn't later, did he?
Well, that was the funny thing, you see, because
what happened then when the sales started flying?
Well, I think that was... So what happened was basically he gave me the dressing down, so I waited for the pause, and I said, it's funny... I said, because I was reading the Grand Met report before I came in to see you, because I thought that's what was about to happen.
And it was all about the sales growth.
And it says in there about how the secret of Grand Met's success is that you empower your CEOs to drive their companies. And he looked at me and he said, well, the sales better grow then. He said the sales.
And did the sales grow?
Within a year, he was doing the speech at the Advertising Association or Marketing Society Award or whatever.
Yeah.
Claiming full credit for empowering the team to deliver fantastic sales success.
Yeah. And it did, obviously.
It did. It flew. Yeah. It was fun. Well, as I say, 3 years we took it from 0 to 30 million, which in today's money terms, I guess would be 100 million, something like that.
In 3 years without a formula to follow in terms of a premium ice cream brand. No. So that was Häagen-Dazs. Then after that?
Well, I said earlier I had this terrible experience with Sainsbury's, and I started to feel that there was this almost uneven fight. I was had worked with some fantastic people in FMCG, the cohort that I'd worked with at Mars, and I was not meeting people on the other side of the negotiating table who I thought had the same talent, but I could see that they had the power in the relationship. And at about that time, Archie Norman and Alan Leighton went into Asda to turn around Asda. And Alan, whom I'd worked with back at Mars, phoned me and a bunch of other people that he knew from his Mars days and said, we've got this incredible opportunity, come join us. So I crossed the table to become
as managing director.
No, I went to run
managing director, didn't you?
Well, I ran the hypermarket division eventually. So the short version of my Asda journey is I went and I headed up one of the 8 operating divisions. So beer, wines and spirits, frozen and bakery, which is a kind of strange combination.
Good combo.
Eventually, I became deputy trading director. Mike Coop, who later became my successor at Sainsbury's, was my boss at that time.
You just follow each other, don't you?
Yeah, one way or the other. It's a small world. And then I was HR director for a year at Asda, which...
you were HR director?
I know. It's hardly
I can imagine
believable,
that.
Is it?
I wonder if I want to call you PC, actually.
It was through a time of quite big restructuring and change. So I'm a change manager first and foremost, so that's why I had that job. And then that's
like business talk. I'm a change manager.
Well, I know. I've done pretty well because we're half an hour in and I don't think I've used any jargon thus far. And then I became managing director of the hypermarkets division, which was the big trading stores with food and non-food.
And look, come on, we've got to get on some controversy. What do you think about the Asda takeover? Because I'll tell you my personal opinion from the outside. It's just that classic example of big bad private equity coming along and saying, we'll finance this company, in this case, what was a petrol forecourt company, with limited grocery experience to buy out what was a good brand. And effectively, their strategy has been to introduce what I can see more petrol forecourt as the businesses. But I'm not sure that the core business is doing that well, really. I can't really, it doesn't, for me, it didn't seem a natural fit.
Well, is it pretty much with the exception of Tesco, all of the major grocery retailers have been through a flirtation with private equity. My time at Sainsbury's, we had what we called our year of non-bids, which was essentially CVC and the Qatari Investment Authority sort of horse trading in the press, but never actually putting their money where their mouth was. And the reason for that is that they're these incredible engines of cash generation with really strong asset underpinning. And that's very attractive to private equity and its financing model. And in the end, Morrisons and Asda both fell to private equity for very different reasons. Asda because Walmart, the end of my journey at Asda was I was running the hypermarket division when Walmart bought Asda. The journey of
which
Archie
I can understand.
And the journey of Archie and Alan's stewardship was a 10x over 7 years value creation journey. Walmart bought the business as their platform to dominate as they were starting to in America, the UK. Before Trump thought Canada should be the 51st state, many American businesses thought the UK should be the 51st state. And because I was running the hypermarkets, I was sort of sucked into the Walmart fold. I only spent a year, but I thought, it was then, still is now, one of the greatest businesses in the world. There was a lot to learn. So I hung around the hoop for a year with Walmart. But ultimately, Walmart didn't succeed. The business pretty much flatlined through their stewardship and they needed an out. And very difficult to sell a business at the time that they were trying to sell it back to the public markets, very much fallen out of love with big grocery retail and big consumer brands, fearful of the UK consumer. So private equity was the obvious choice, which brings me to your question, because it depends what question
you're... the obvious partner?
Well, it was a bidding process. Well, it didn't really matter. I don't think that's necessarily relevant, other than, of course, it gave them the firepower from the very successful growth of their business and their partnership with private equity to buy Asda. And it was a competitive process and they had the highest bid. And if you ask them today, they would still say, I think, that from a financial point of view, not that they yet have an exit, and you're in the end, until you exit, you don't get to add the numbers up. But they're largely in for free. They've dividended back their original equity by selling off the depots.
They've done a glazer.
And so on. Yeah, so one could say that. But fundamentally, they put the business, put in charge of the business. People didn't know what they were doing.
Did anyone ever approach you in terms of private? There's a wry smile. Well, you obviously got big lots of approaches.
Look, it wasn't. With the small exception of having taken a non-executive directorship at M&S 5 years after I left Sainsbury's, I've always operated a never go back philosophy. So no, I would never have gone back.
But even go back as a chairman, though, it wouldn't be necessarily full time, but certainly fronting up
well, I mean, there's a
buyout.
question, right? So Stuart Rose was chairman probably for the first 5 years. He certainly wasn't full time. When he finally left, he conceded. I think it would be fair to say that the business had not done well whilst he'd been chair. And they've now brought my old mate Alan back, but he's full-time executive chair. I mean, he's got lots of other jobs, but he's in there full guns blazing because that's what it needs. But they've just done a really bad job for customers consistently over a long period of time. And the thing about...
I think they lost the core, to be honest.
Well, yeah, and grocery retailers have incredible inertia, right? You can do a lot of nasty things to them before you screw them up. Sainsbury's, when I went there in 2004, it lost market share 14 years on the trot. 14 years on the trot. But the lowest like-for-like it ever had was minus 2.2%. So it's a long, slow, lingering
and you had
decline.
10 years of like-for-like growth.
Going in the other direction. But, we were probably only really a quarter or two or three from complete crisis when I got to Sainsbury's.
So who came up with the phrase? Was it you or Donald Trump? Make Sainsbury's great again?
I stole it from Ronald Reagan. Actually.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, is that a Ronald Reagan phrase?
Yeah. So I had my
I'm not surprised.
I had
Trump.
my 6-month garden leave, as you do, because I'd left Marks and Spencer. Obviously, they didn't want me to go straight to Sainsbury's. Actually, it was probably about 4 months in the end. But so I was on garden leave and had quite a lot of restrictions about what I was allowed to do. So one of the things I did was I took myself off to America because we're in late 2003. Walmart had been in the market 2 or 3 years. Everyone was still convinced that Asda, with Walmart's backing, were going to fundamentally change the value-quality equation in the UK. And so I did a road trip in America looking at marketplaces where because Walmart's market entry strategy in America was they'd go to a town and flood it. And because the planning restrictions are very different there. So they'd go to a small Midwestern town and open 5 shops one Friday afternoon. And within a year or two, kill most of the local food retail. But one of the things that was emerging as I went round America was that the survivor, indeed, the business that not just local business that survived, but not just survived, thrived, was the quality food focused retailer. So those that went to try and toe to toe on price always got killed. Yeah. But those that said we're going to double down on our quality and value, but quality credentials. So this theme was emerging, and I missed a connection in Dallas, Fort Worth, and it was a day before I could catch a plane. So I wrote on the back of not quite back of a fag packet, but on a couple of pieces of paper, the original Sainsbury's turnaround plan.
Why? Because you knew you were going to Sainsbury's.
No, this was on my garden leave, right?
Okay.
So this was part of my
you already accepted the job.
Learn before I get there.
Yeah.
But
you knew you were going there.
And I was traveling with a guy called Michael Meyer, who any of your listeners who would know anything about retail was the sort of doyen of McKinsey in his day, retail guru. And so we were writing this business plan and we were trying to come up with a name for it. And it started as Project Dallas, because that's where we were. And then we saw this.
Sounds like.
Then we saw this Ronald Reagan thing. And part of the narrative, although we hadn't quite used the language, was that it was we'd started calling it Back to the Future.
Back to basics.
And it was all about back to basics. The very first Sainsbury's store said quality perfect, price is lower, right? 1869, Drury Lane, London. And our advertising campaign, when we finally did proper advertising about 3 years into my tenure, was quality perfect, price is lower. And it was quite explicitly a nod to those same 4 words, but with a modern
It's weird that
twist.
You say this, because my daughter, when she applied for her first job in advertising at Ogilvy, did her study on Sainsbury's. And I remember her telling me the study. I don't think you were CEO. I think you just left by then. And
Sainsbury's is on the GCSE because several of my nephews and nieces over the years have phoned me up and said, I'm studying you at the moment. Can you give me some tips?
But she was talking about the basic range. I think it was virtually sort of reenacting what you did, which is, make great basics, core basics that were just, look, you go to Sainsbury's and their basics range are the best range out there. And that's what Lidl and Aldi do really, really well. Sometimes the choice got too carried away, didn't it?
Yeah, well, what basics was, in many ways, basics told you a lot of what was wrong with Sainsbury's. So the first was, it was Sainsbury's entry price point proposition. But even though it was his entry price point proposition, they'd convinced themselves that because Sainsbury's quality was better, they could charge a different price for entry price, which is a basic contradiction. Secondly, they relaxed some of the own brand rules. So, for example, all the Sainsbury's own label and Taste the Difference wasn't allowed to use mechanically recovered meat, but they were allowed to use mechanically recovered meat. So your promise as a Sainsbury's shopper was denuded, if you like. And then thirdly, they only ranged it where they thought they were poor shoppers. And something in excess of 80% of shopping baskets in Sainsbury's at the time I was there contained both Taste the Difference and Basics at the same time. It's the same customer for different usage occasions. Yeah. So it was kind of flawed on multiple levels. Well, that's why, because their mindset was, why would you allow someone to spend less when they can afford and might be willing to spend more? Whereas my
your core range.
No, but you see, my mindset's the opposite, which is if you want someone to buy your better product, make it so good they want to buy it. Don't force them to buy it because they can't buy the cheaper product, right? And so we pushed one of the legs of the strategy was pushing Basics to a much broader range. I think we took it to about 600 SKUs. It was a kind of begrudging 150 when I got there, and pushed it out to the entire estate because it was our entry.
Quality, value sort of emphasis,
and put the same quality rules in place.
Yeah, totally.
So if you're making a promise, as we did later in my time at Sainsbury's, to go 100% fair trade on bananas.
Yeah,
right? You couldn't have Basics bananas that weren't fair trade, and then all your other. Yeah, that would have been nonsense, right?
Yeah.
So there were lots of things like that. But so the story of making Sainsbury's great again, it was a phrase stolen, I say, from the Ronald Reagan era, but it was absolutely the story, which is just take Sainsbury's in 2004, 5, 6 back to where it once was. Obviously updated for the time.
Which was a quality retailer, because I remember in the 70s and 80s, Sainsbury's was regarded as a quality retailer, say compared to Tesco's. Tesco's was the Asda at the time, because Asda didn't really exist.
Yeah, if you look at the Asda story, right? The Asda story, the turnaround story started with the pocket tap, right? It started with the idea that the pocket tap was the icon of value. You know, you save the
pocket tap.
But at the end of the ad.
Oh yeah,
pocket tap, right?
Yeah.
And Alan, as marketing director, bought that back. And so philosophically, the thing that people talked about when we were doing all of our research in the early days was back to when Sainsbury's favourite advertising was everyone's favourite ingredient. And it was basically celebrities cooking, but with a twist, using an ingredient they bought at Sainsbury's. Yeah. I think Dennis Healy, Selena Scott, there were people at the kind of
like an onion.
No, it was more
tomato puree.
Before my time, but one of the most successful things we did with Jamie Oliver was we used Jamie to do the same thing. And I remember once he did a spaghetti bolognese in the advert, and instead of grating Parmesan cheese, he grated nutmeg onto the spaghetti bolognese. And we sold 5 years worth of nutmeg in about a fortnight.
Wow.
Now, of course, the key to that is you have to buy 5 years worth of nutmeg before you run the ad, because you have to believe it's going to shift. Right?
No one thinks nutmeg is going to shift.
It shifted.
Wow.
It shifted, yeah. Because it was back to the real Sainsbury's. And you had to get value. I mentioned earlier, mate, so I remember I hadn't been in the job long, and we got the discount card, and so my now ex-wife had started shopping, and she phoned me up, and I won't tell you the exact words she used. She basically said that she thought I was in some trouble in the job. She said, because your prices are bonkers and your quality's shit, she said. Yeah. And she was about right. We had prices in the wrong place and quality that didn't justify the prices, even if they had been in the right place.
Yeah. But if you don't mind me saying, like, everyone sort of knows you as, the ex-CEO of Sainsbury's, but that's what I don't know you for that. What I know you for as being the guy that came up with Simply Food when you were at M&S. So let's go back before you were CEO of Sainsbury's. Am I right in saying that you were director of food and you came up with the whole Simply Food concept where they literally had their first dedicated food stores?
Yeah, well, I think that would be to stretch the point, but I left Asda.
You've got to exaggerate a little bit, we need a bit of clickbait.
Well, yeah, when I left Asda, obviously M&S had come calling. I mentioned earlier I was HR director at Asda for a period of time, and I remember the HR director, Helena Feltham at Marks and Spencer, she said, we really like the fact you'd been HR director, because we thought that, fully fledged Mars and Asda person might have been too hard for us. Anyway, Marks and Spencer's was probably in those days the second of many turnarounds. Luke van der Velde had just gone in. Luke had come from a Prometheus Carrefour background, so he was a kind of food retailer.
So this is pre-Stuart.
Heart. This is pre-Stuart, so this is 2000. And so my brief was to set up a proper standalone food business. It was an operating division inside M&S, but largely fragmented. There wasn't a head of foods as such as I became sort of the first proper head of foods. And at the time they had about 8, 9, 10 food standalones. The last food standalone had been opened about 10 or 11 years before. And I remember one of my early board meetings, David Norgrove, who was running clothing at the time, and I'd come to pitch opening food standalone stores, said words to the effect of, we can't allow food to open standalone stores, then our customers will have no reason to come to our shops at all, which was kind of the point, right? The food had come to rely on the footfall that food was generating because the clothing just wasn't good enough.
But it was weird, wasn't it? Because at one stage, their clothing was so strong.
Yeah, but
that's why you went there. They had like total market domination.
But, 80s and 90s, complacency, kept its supply chain, maybe for what they thought were the right motives in those days in the UK, which meant that they ended up with actually poorer quality product at higher prices and Soho. Yeah, exactly. And so my very first food board meeting was to agree the name for this new idea of opening small standalone food stores and agree the proposition. So that became Simply Food. We targeted 3,000 square feet because that's where the convenience store legislation caps out in the
transportation
UK.
Hubs?
No, it's mostly, transportation hubs were a subset of that. So I signed the first deal with, what became SSP.
Yeah.
So the motor service stations, all the railway stations, which they have a very dominant position in. So all of that was during my 3 years. So I led the period that created what has now become Food Standalone and Simply Foods at M&S.
Which has been an incredible success, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. It's and still is. It's the beating heart of the business today. But the great thing about M&S, notwithstanding recent challenges, is that both sides of the business are doing well at the same time, and that hasn't happened in a very long time.
A long while. And do you think that's your greatest legacy?
What, Simply Foods?
To date, yeah.
No, I think Sainsbury's is my greatest legacy because, truth be told, well, and obviously somebody else could have done it. I was the person that had the great opportunity, but Sainsbury's was close to a reasonably major implosion when I went there. So, I think I not just led the saving of Sainsbury's, but also, when I left Asda, our articulated strategy at Asda was 2 by 2002. So to overtake Sainsbury's and formally become the number 2 player alongside Tesco. And by the time I got to Sainsbury's after my 3 years or so at M&S, that had happened. And Sainsbury's were firmly number 3 and had lost market share 14 years in a row since John Sainsbury had retired in 92. Actually lost market share on the last couple of years of his stewardship. Well, you won't find that mentioned in his book. So no, I think the turnaround of Sainsbury's and the fact that it has continued, it's one thing to turn around a business, but I think the measure of great success as a CEO has to be how businesses do after you leave. And it's gone on to not necessarily greater strength, but it's continued to hold its own and fight its position in a very tough and challenging marketplace.
And why did you leave after 10 years? Because you had 10 years of growth. It's not as though it's like being a centre forward, isn't it? It's not as though you were scoring goals. Well, you were scoring goals.
It's funny you should say that, but I'd there were sort of three things going on in my head. One was the kind of Gary Lineker school of retirement, and not the current
He's only
one.
just retired.
Yeah, not this one, no. But the last one, he went out, he could have probably played for England for another season or two, broken Bobby Charlton's scoring record. Yeah. He went to Japan for a year or two, made a bit of money and retired age 30, 31, right? Grampus 8, yeah. So there was that kind of idea, go out at the top when people are still wanting more, was partly in my head. I didn't want to be that kind of political metaphor, that all political careers end in failure.
Yeah.
And it was partly a 2-term presidency idea. The average FTSE 100 chief exec lasts 4 years. So I had in my mind I wanted to last twice as long as the average FTSE 100 chief exec. And for the first 2 or 3 years, Paddy Power actually ran a book on which grocery chief exec will be the first to be fired this year. And I was odds-on favourite 3 years running.
Oh, wow.
So I was quite chuffed with the fact that I'd sort of proved him wrong. So I sort of...
Next time you do well like that, can you just let me know? I might have a bet.
Well, and you know, then we
That's
did...
not insider trading, by the way. That's...
and then we had this big focus on 2012 and London 2012. And I think a lot of people thought that would be a moment to check out. It was fantastic year for Sainsbury's. You know, it was very... much lauded and awarded. And, you know, if people ask me for the one day I'm proudest, it's the day I was in the basketball stadium at the Olympic Park in the Paralympics.
Yeah, copper box.
With 5,000. No, the basketball court was the purpose built.
Yeah.
I think it got sold to Rio. And it was the tip-off for the Mexico-West Germany wheelchair basketball. And they allowed me to do the tip-off. And there were 5,000 Sainsbury's colleagues in the stadium. Right?
Wow.
That was quite a proud moment.
Yeah.
And so I felt that I had to kind of prove the doubters wrong and hang around a little longer just to prove I didn't sort of just run out at the best possible moment, and make sure we equipped the business for succession, which I did. Mike Coop took over from me, and then Simon Roberts since. And, you know, in the end, 10 was a round number. So, and, you know, I there was a point when I was still one of the 20 longest serving and 20 youngest FTSE 100 CEOs.
Wow.
Because I started very young. So when I left Sainsbury's at 52, I was younger than the average first appointment CEO, and I'd done 10 years.
That's it. You did Sainsbury's. Did you go to retire, or did you go straight on to what you're doing now, which is a series of non-exec positions and chairmanships?
Yeah, well, my initial ambition was to take a year off, and that sort of failed. I got the opportunity to chair a Formula One team, so I chaired a Formula One team out of administration, the Mana Marussia team.
Yeah.
So that was a fun year. My son was just starting out his racing at the time.
Was he driving for them?
He actually, the reason I got involved was he was contracted to drive for them and they went bust. And so the new owner phoned up and said, given that your son's contracted to us, would you like to chair it? So that's how that happened.
You could have been the new Lawrence Stroll.
Well, yeah, I don't think I'm quite amassing a few noughts on the financial firepower for that one. But no, so I had the opportunity to join Terra Firma, working with Guy Hands. Guy was at the height of his pump in the 1990s, made a number of quite poor investments and had a portfolio of largely failing businesses.
EMI.
And, EMI had long since failed. I never had any involvement with that. So I had the opportunity to go plural, but in one place, but in a very hands-on way. I didn't think I was ready to be a kind of governance-driven chair. I'm more exec chair. I'm probably the chair I would have hated when I was chief exec, truth be told.
Chairs are boring, though, don't you think? Because you can't be disrupting. The chair's meant to coordinate everything.
I like being the disrupting type.
So that's what I like. That's why I don't ever want to be a chair.
I worked with Guy for around 5 years. It was cut my teeth as being a chair. We had a reasonably good hit rate. We sold most of the businesses. We lost half of the care home business to administration, but the rest were sold successfully. And just recently, a guy sold the majority of Annington Homes, which was the last Terra Firma business I used to sit on the board of. And then after 5 years, because I'd also said to myself, I don't want to go back into my old world quickly. So I sat on the PwC public interest body board.
Oh, let me go to sleep.
Well, it was actually super interesting. I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. And it kept me attached to kind of mainstream business, because the private equity world can be a bit of a cocoon. And, people need to be mindful. PwC audit around a third of the top 150 companies in this country. So that was a very good way to stay attached to, if you like, to the mainstream world. And then I've just slowly, since I finished with Terra Firma about the start of COVID, I've built a portfolio of non-executive chairmanships, which are reasonably chunky and mainstream. Dexter's, London's biggest estate agent, should you be considering buying or selling. OVO, number 4 energy retailer in the UK, challenges obviously in the energy retail market. I chair the National Lottery through a business called Allwyn, which is owned by Czech private equity. But we won, together with Keith Mills, I led the bid for the competition, which we won for versus the incumbent Camelot. So that was a cool thing, I think. And then lastly, Itsu Grocery. I chair the grocery side. But in that, I mean, that really started as a mentoring relationship. I'd known Julian Metcalf, the founder of Itsu and previously Pret, back from his Pret days. We were fighting over the same sites back in 1990 when I was at Häagen-Dazs and he was starting out. And we've had this kind of 30-year conversation about one day we must do something together. And he phoned me up and said, I've got this brilliant young CEO, Claudia, and she could do with some help. Would you like to mentor us? So I started mentoring Claudia and eventually got involved as chair of the grocery business. So we built a very nice grocery business. The team are young, fantastic. They don't really need much help from me, although I give what help I can. And then I do a bunch of similar stuff to that, largely under the radar, largely not declared, where I invest small time because I'm not really an investor, but I know, me, my experience, I like to think.
You're a part investor in Nude.
I am,
yeah.
But I invest my time and energy more than, I mean, the money is to make it pay back for the time and energy you're putting in. It's not the reason that you're doing it. And I enjoy that thoroughly. And actually, it's relatively small amount of time for a lot of human payback. You can see the difference and help you can make. So I enjoy that side as well.
And I mean, it's a privilege to be working with you at the moment in a advisory capacity, and I've really enjoyed that journey.
Well, likewise, because you do all the hard work. So I actually enjoy the fact that you do all the hard work, and I can just be the glory taker when it's there to be taken.
Well, hopefully we're going to get some glory.
Yeah,
Let's see.
I fully expect so.
Let's wrap up on a couple of questions, okay? So firstly, your heroes in terms of your consumer brand career, people that you've worked with that have absolutely inspired you.
I'm asked that question in various guises a lot. I said earlier when I was a kid, Bobby Charlton and Ian Botham were my sporting heroes. I've never been that way in my business life. I honestly couldn't name an individual who has a major part in my journey.
But everyone.
But I could name dozens and dozens of individuals whom I've learned from and stolen from. I like to think in a good way, I'm a real parasite. I never go into a meeting believing that I can't learn something. And I've worked with so many fantastic people.
Come on, name a few. A few people that you've worked with that, wow, they really impressed me.
Well, if I go back to my early Mars days, Alan Layton, Neil England I mentioned, Paul Monk I mentioned, Richard Baker, who will be known to some, went on to be chief executive of Boots. There actually was another Richard Baker who went on to great things in Pepsi. If in my Häagen-Dazs days, I worked with a guy called Ross Lovelock, who I've still stayed in touch since, built a strategy consulting business called Square. He worked at Pepsi and developed some of their strategy thinking there, and I learned loads from him. And, if I go through my retail, virtually every member of my board, I had a board of about 10 people, plus or minus the operating board, probably turned once in my entire time. So, 20-ish people on that board. About half of them went on to be chief execs. That's the thing about big business turnarounds. We do personalize it. We have the sort of cult of the individual. But the power of a good group of people where 2 + 2 + 2 + 2 is equaling a number much bigger than 8. And, so whether it be Gwyn Burr, who was our marketing director during that time, Mike Coop was my successor, Roger Burnley went on to be chief executive of Asda, just really top draw people.
These are all icons
come
in the
together
industry
at the same time.
If you could recommend 2 industry heroes for this podcast, who would you recommend?
Oh, you should definitely get Stuart because he's great.
Right, I'm going to invite Stuart.
And obviously Charles, your great mate Charles, if you can persuade him, although he tends to keep his counsel.
That's as rare as rocking horse shit.
And maybe Julian.
Public interviews.
Julian occasionally does. Julian Metcalf. He's
okay. I don't really know Julian.
Well, he did Pret a Manger, took it to greatness, and now his passion project, and I think he's nearer 70 than 60, is Itsu, and is still the driving force behind that business, albeit it's partly owned by private equity. He's still the driving force there.
I want to finish on one sort of little bit of controversy, okay? And I'll start off by what I think, and I'd like you to react, which is the destruction of our high streets and the future of retail. Because if this is your serious face now, you think you're going to get like set up here or not?
Yeah.
I mean, basically, like yourself, I've been in a fortunate enough position to travel the world, look at lots of different retail operations. And I really believe that we have some of the best retailers in the world and have had some of the best retailers in the world. But what we currently have is the destruction of our high streets. And I think that's largely due to the fact that there's an unlevel playing field. That simply you've got these American giants like Amazon that are not paying their fair share corporation tax, certainly not paying their fair of business rates, recently opted out of paying this internet tax or whatever was happening. But I know you're quite close to the Labour government, and I just feel as though we need to do more. I wouldn't use the word protect, but to create a level playing field for high streets, because I really do believe in physical retail. And we talked about that in the past, that you can't beat the process sometimes of walking in a store, touching that product. And do you know what you're doing when you've got internet retailing is you're creating a monopoly. And in the end, they're just going to charge you so much. And that's what's happening to get traffic, that actually it's making in-store physical retail now actually more attractive. What's your thoughts on the future of our high streets and what we should be doing to protect them? Because at the rate we're going, we're not going to have a high street.
Yeah, look, I don't agree with that final point, but there's quite a lot in the question which I do
didn't
agree
expect
with.
you to.
Well, look, take the point about level playing field, right? I subscribe to that completely. Well, no, let's go right back to the start of your question. Actually, I'm not sure we know what we mean when we say high streets anyway. People mean different things.
Physical retail.
Physical retail. And the data on physical retail is nowhere near as downbeat and as depressing as your question implies. Actually, if you take a 25, 30-year view, more retail spaces opened and closed in at least half of the last 15, 20
But we never had
years.
high streets so empty.
Not true. The levels of occupancy, levels of vacancy are not particularly dramatic in the context of history. Of course, if you drive out to Gatwick through South London, you can go through things that you and I would recognise a high street that seems to be largely charity shops and boarded.
Like
but
Croydon.
you can also go through incredibly vibrant things that people would recognise as community high streets. So I think you have to be super careful about the generalisation of the death of the high street. And by the way, I don't think that's a convincing argument with politicians, because they can see the data too. And I think they poo-poo it. I just think they poo-poo it. I've sat in many, many a meeting where they do exactly that. Then to your point about level playing field, I 100% agree with the level playing field point. Physical retail, because I think physical retail is viscerally part of the way people want to buy goods and in fact services. We are human beings, so we want human contact. And by far the best positioned businesses to become multi-channel and eventually omni-channel, many claim that they are, few are close to what I think omni-channel is yet. Businesses will have physical presence, and indeed many of the online-only businesses are coming in the other direction in terms of having physical presence for that reason. But we have legacy taxes, and the playing field is super uneven.
From Victoria era.
And they're Victorian era taxes. So the three big taxes that retail business pay are people, property, and profit. And a lot gets focused on profit, and it's a sideshow in the bigger picture. All of our tax systems are being disintermediated by international businesses that can domicile their profits wherever they wish to. That will change.
Use tax avoidance schemes.
Well, they are, everything that they do, I don't subscribe to the kind of commercial business defense where they say everything we do is legal, right? Obeying the law doesn't make you a good citizen. Obeying the law you do because you don't want to get fined or go to jail, right?
Well, Meta's saying that the point of sale when you're receiving advertising income on Facebook or Instagram is in Ireland, which is ridiculous.
Well, apparently when you hire an Uber in London, you're doing business in Amsterdam, right? We know that's not true, right? So, but profits are a bit of a sideshow in the scheme of things. The two big things that kill the Labour are business rates. It's a property tax, which was once a good proxy for business activity to pay for the local infrastructure that supports business activity.
Before there was the
Long
internet.
since hasn't been. And the people who don't pay business rates use all the things that business rates. The example I always quote is that brown cardboard box, which is picked up by your dustman, or you take it to the council recycling tip. That process is paid for by the business rates of the retailer that lost the sale.
There's no responsibility of Amazon to recycle anything.
Undoubtedly, business rates are a really disleveling, or whatever the word is, uneven tax. And whether it be the schools that their drivers were educated at, the roads that they're driving on, all of those things are paid for by business rates, and they have disintermediated in their business model the legislature. And the tax system should not be a competitive advantage in business models. And the legislature has allowed it to become so. And then the third big one, you couldn't make it up, is what I call pretend self-employment. So what this government has done, the single thing I am most disappointed by, is they have decided to tax actual, real, proper employment by responsible companies more.
With the national insurance.
Thereby further incentivizing pretend self-employment. The delta...
Well, you mean like the Ubers of this world?
Well, all these people who these organisations... Now, we do now have the difference between an employee and a worker, so we've done something to close the gap. But, Martin Taylor, in his report on modern work, which he did for the Royal Society probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, even then he estimated that was disintermediating 30 billion from the exchequer. And imagine what that number must be now. So if the government is fishing for 30 billion or 50 billion, whatever number, they have to get after grey employment and tax it the same as all other employment to level the playing field. London
Totally.
cabs can't compete with Uber because of the tax advantages that Uber enjoys. I get in a vehicle to move around London because I want the driver to know where I'm going, get there quickly.
Exactly.
And I like the fact that he's
And
also
they're
safety
electric.
tested and insured and all of those things. And he is taxed almost out of existence versus the person driving the Uber car. And it seems to me, if you were to measure productivity, the productivity of the London cab is greater than the productivity of Uber in terms of the miles that they drive with a passenger in them in a day. And if you want to know why this country has a flat line on productivity for the last 15 years, I think you need to look not much further than the gig economy, because the gig economy rewards unproductive work in a really quite profound way versus much more productive businesses. And that's true of London cabs and Ubers, and it's true of retail versus online retail. So is that a strong enough view
That's
for you
very
on the
good.
subject?
I actually believe you should be a spokesperson for the retail. Come on. You need to be get out there more. Right, quick fire question. Okay. Don't sit on the fence. Because look, you don't need to sit on the fence anymore. We're not on a publicly traded company.
The splinters hurt.
Okay. Physical retail or internet?
Physical retail.
Great. Pro-Brexit.
But they're not mutually exclusive. Just
both. An omni-channel experience. Pro-Brexit or anti-Brexit?
Well, I was pro not doing Brexit. I was pro-Remain, and I think it's a crime on our grandchildren that we decided to leave the European Union.
But why I know you've actually been quite outspoken, but why is more business leaders not stood up and said the damage that this is doing to our economy? Why?
Well, I think it's one of those things that it's terribly difficult for businesses with broad customer bases to take partisan political positions. That is hard, particularly if you're a public company, because a bunch of your shareholders say it's not your agenda. So you have to find a route into the agenda that is business. So I campaigned to retain the union against Scottish independence because I felt that was against the interests of our employees and the companies that we served. And I campaigned pro-Remain because I believed it was against the interests of our employees and the customers that we served. Not because I have a personal view, although I do, that I think it was a terrible thing to do to my grandchildren. But I at least wanted to be in a position of telling my grandchildren when I have them that I gave it a go. But I think it is hard. And in a world where you get this tremendously aggressive response to holding what most of the time seem to be perfectly reasonable points of view, most people's knee-jerk response, most public companies, chief execs will be advised by their PR people not to bother. It's mostly downside and very little upside. And that's what of course it's done is
That's how you get the situation,
stifled real and proper debate.
which is crazy. Well, listen, Justin, it's been an
Thank you.
absolute pleasure having you today. We've actually over.
Yeah, you have, and you got me
Yeah.
to terrible trouble. I think my phone was ringing. I
Was
saw
it?
out of my left eye, so I am going to have to dash.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.